What if solving your talent shortage had nothing to do with job boards, recruiters, or retention bonuses, and everything to do with how you grow your people? Today, I'm joined by Mark Peters, CEO of Butterball Farms and author of The Retention Trap. We're going to unpack why developing your employees for their next job might be the smartest move for your business. Now, if you've ever asked, what if I invest in my people and they leave? You're going to want to hear Mark's answer. Welcome to the Working Well podcast, the show that explores the critical intersection of leadership, business strategy, sustainable human performance, and how those things are defining the future of work. I'm your host, Tim Borys. Mark, welcome to the Working Well podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Tim, thanks for inviting me. I'm actually really excited to be here today.
Well, I know after our last conversation, this is going to be it's a topic close to my heart and something that I know that our listeners are going to want to dive deep into. And a big part of that is we hear retention all the time these days. When you think of retention and you've got your book, The Retention Trap, what comes to mind for you? And I guess where do you see the biggest gap that companies are missing out on?
That's a great question. And I because of the work I've done on the book, The Retention Trap, I have come to start to dislike the word retention, and I keep trying to get it out of my vocabulary, and I try to get it out of the vocabulary of a lot of meetings I go to, but it's really embedded. Like as employers, we're asked all the time, like, what are your retention rates and what are your turnover rates, and it's a big deal for employers keeping good talent, and so. I think the problem for me is it's one of those problems that leads us to a set of solutions. And they tend to be things like compensation, benefits, flexible time, maybe work environment. And actually, I don't think those get us to where we need to go. I think those solutions they're kind of the easy button. We can raise pay, we can increase benefits, we can mess with flexible time, we can pretty up the environment. But when you look at some of the reasons people leave jobs, the top three reasons are toxic work environment, they don't like the person they report to, and there's no pathway for advancement or personal advancement. And I think the other thing is it's not like number 4, but it's like 5 or 6 is purposeful work. And so when you start thinking about retaining people and you're pulling all the common levers and you don't see any results, I'm really not that surprised. But I think if we think about investing in our people and it leads us down a different way of thinking. It's almost like going from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset. Like we're going to pour into our people. And I think that the unintended consequence of that is you build an environment people don't want to leave, right? Because you're really looking at, you got to do it authentically. You can't do it and not mean it, which is why I advocate for getting to know the people that work for you. But I do think the investment lane gives us a lot more options. It makes our companies robust, and it makes our people more resilient, and it makes our communities more resilient.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and when I was writing, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say one of those top 3 things you mentioned, obviously the toxic work environment and not liking who you're working for I would like to say it's relatively easy to fix from a leadership standpoint. But the third one is that career path. And something you had mentioned earlier was that maybe retention is not the goal. Like,
right.
Why might you not want to keep your people?
Yeah. So again, in trying to figure out how to communicate this, and I had a writer that helped me write the book, and she kept asking me for an analogy. And I don't remember if I brought this up when we were talking, but I struggled for a long time, and I would say, Lisa, I can't come up with an analogy. And I spent some time one summer a couple of years ago in Salt Lake City, and I got to go visit the Great Salt Lake. And there's like two organisms that live or can live in the Great Salt Lake, and that's it. It's a terminal lake. 5 rivers run in, no rivers run out. And then I live in the Great Lakes region, right? And it's one of the most biodiverse environments on the planet, with rivers running in and rivers running out and all kinds of farmland and fish life and all the rest of it. And so my analogy was, do you want to be the Great Salt Lake or do you want to be the Great Lakes? And I think that, especially in the speed of change of today's world, this idea that we somehow are going to spend all these resources to make sure people don't leave our company when we constantly need new ideas. And whether those ideas are coming in through education and development that people who already work for us are getting, or new people coming into our organization, and we help to create a more rich and community talent environment by letting some of our people go to another company for the next best opportunity and being okay with that move, right? So,
and you mentioned something about the difference between small to mid-sized companies and the large organizations with career ladders. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. Yes. My book is really targeted at what I would call small to mid-market companies. And part of what I do in the book is talk about some of the things that are going on the large system level. And there's some incredible tools and some big platforms that are being used by healthcare and big software companies and government. And, for a lot of us in the small to mid-market range, we don't have the bandwidth to go out and find those resources. But what they're really working on is talent supply chain. In fact, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation has a curriculum called Talent Pipeline Management, and it's a really well built out curriculum. It's accessible to anybody. It's on their website. It's free, but they've really targeted large scaled organizations for the rollout. And so I try to highlight some of the things that are going on in the environment for small to mid-market companies to at least get sort of an easy button to some of those things. But all of those tend to be enterprise-centric, or what I call enterprise-centric. The goal is sort of protect the organization, make sure you've got a good supply of talent, make sure you understand what your talent sources are, and that they understand what you're looking for and the competencies of talent. I think what we have an advantage in that if we're open to building a network of companies to move talent through, is that we really have proximity to our people in a way that big scaled companies don't have. We have the ability to really get to know and sort of understand what drives the people that work for us. And understanding that I might have somebody that comes into my finance team out of college and quickly finds out they'd rather be in HR than in finance. And I can figure out how to get them some education. And if it's not in my organization for the next thing, if I've got a network of companies that have a similar cultural perspective, we could figure those things out, right? In big companies, it would be very difficult to sort of customize solutions, if you will, for individuals, just because of their scale.
Yeah, and that's, as a small business owner myself, it's something that is a bit of the secret sauce, is you build that direct relationship across the entire organization, depending on the size.
Right.
And what was it? Bo Burlingham, Small Giants, he talks about I think it was W.L. Gore that had the 150 person units, and every time it grew past 150 people, he would carve it off and make another unit, because he found that was about the limit of how you could know something about everyone in that unit. It was a fascinating story. And then someone had said people have about 150 close connections, and above that it starts to become acquaintances.
Right. That makes sense to me. I mean, my company we're about 170 all in now, and it's becoming difficult to really, pay attention to all the different stories of people, and people that have been there longer. Obviously, I have much more connection than people who started in the last 90 days. But I do think that proximity, and what happens when you know people's stories is you tend to care what happens to them. Mm-hmm. Like it's important to you to know what happens to them. And, I've got lots of stories of people that went on to do great things. And I've got stories of people that left and things didn't go so well. And it makes me sad when I hear those stories because I knew them,
Well, and you said something that stuck out a lot last time we chatted about helping people move through an organization. And like you said, the Great Lakes versus Great Salt Lake. I think a lot of companies are trying to build Hotel California to put it so you can check in, but you can never leave.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because it is. And I don't know how much, everybody's using AI for something these days, right? And I think one afternoon I was messing around with ChatGPT, and I have this little fascination with the language we use around hiring people and the language we use around people leaving, whether, we're initiating the exit or they're initiating the exit. And the lexicon is very different. So I wanted ChatGPT to help me put together a comedy routine around, how we celebrate people starting on our teams and then all of the other kinds of language we use when people leave us. And it was pretty funny. I haven't cleaned it up, but now I've just drifted from your question. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. The part of it goes to how people move through organizations and how when leaders are okay and actually encourage that growth and development, like if someone can't progress in your organization, a lot of times leaders won't even think about trying to get them to go somewhere else because this whole turnover thing, we want retention.
And well, you said Hotel California, and I think you're right. So the other thing that I tell people when I go out and talk about it is, if you ask many employers, do you consider yourself to be an educator? And they will say no. However, we all educate people every day. Well, it's training on a new piece of software, it's training on some new processes, whatever it is. We are, in fact, educators day in and day out. And I think that if we were willing to apply our problem-solving skills and engage more intentionally around educating, the idea of educating people beyond just what they need to do their job, but to making them more resilient and better problem solvers within our organization or the next place they go, and stop being concerned about whether they go someplace else. If we just did that, forget about building the network, but train with abandon, train and not worry about whether they leave or not. I think it dramatically changes the culture of your organization and the resiliency.
Yeah, I agree. And you see, to be fair, you see that in small companies and large companies where it's the cashier eventually becomes the CEO or the stock person or the mailroom clerk that all of a sudden ends up in the C-suite because they've gone through every position in the organization and they've learned and they've grown. And yeah, there's so many great examples of that. Yet on the other side, there are so many great examples of leaders that just pigeonhole their people and don't develop them and just let them sit and languish in a role for decades sometimes. And you had mentioned about the growth potential in the organization or the pride in their job, feeling they're making a difference.
Purpose in their job.
Purpose, yeah.
I think that if people know that there's an expectation that, like, one of our guiding principles is to promote continuous learning and innovation. So the idea that you're going to walk into my company and there's an expectation that you're you're going to go on a learning journey along with work. And part of our purpose is to, again, have people be more resilient next year than they were at the beginning of this year. And whether that means they stay with us or not, I'm not going to say we don't care, because that's not true. It's okay with us if they leave, especially if they leave for an opportunity that we couldn't provide them. And the reality is, I can impact talent growth faster than I can grow my company. So it's not infrequent that people have obtained a level of education or skill attainment that gets them to a level that I don't have the next job for. That's not uncommon in my organization. I'm a food packaging company, and we have a fairly large group of entry level and say plus 1, 2, 3, 4 roles. And beyond that, it tends to have a lot less of the next sets of roles. So I see people that come in and they want to be successful and they want to do the next thing. And the only way for me to adequately take care of them is figure out who else's company can I send these folks to, because I don't have the next role for them.
Well, and you believe so strongly in that. You actually, was it you started or you got involved in an organization called, I think it's called The Source?
Yeah, so I appreciate you bringing that. That was called, my first book was called The Source, and I helped found a collaboration of employers in 2003. The organization, The Source, now has 28 member companies, and it's not, a lot of people think about these things as being like a sector alliance, like they're all manufacturers, but we have manufacturers, we have some healthcare. I think we have a service company or two in the mix now as well. And so we're sort of across sectors. But the idea is, with The Source, was you've got to stabilize people. So the string that sort of runs through this, or the line that runs through it, is this idea of getting to know your people. And once I started to understand the backgrounds of the people and the lives that people were bringing to work and how destabilized they were, I was like, I got to figure out a way to bring resources around the people in my workforce so they can stay at work. Like, they can't even think about what they want to do next if they don't know if they're going to be able to pay their rent, or they're going to be able to buy groceries, or get their car fixed, or whatever it is. And there's just a myriad of things that people bring to work that they have a hard time solving for. And so we did successfully build that organization. It's been replicated across the country now. And so I think we've learned how to do that. We've learned how, and we can demonstrate that to other employers. And there's, again, places they can connect to an organization like The Source around the country, because employers aren't the expert. We're not the expert at providing services or building programs to stabilize people's lives. But there are great community resources in most communities to do that kind of thing. It's connecting them effectively with those organizations. And what we've learned is that when somebody needs those services, they value them much higher than, say, their health insurance or even their 401k or some of these things, because they're very immediate needs when they strike in people's lives. And so is their job. The employer side of that is, we tend to think people just don't want to come to work. And we don't really understand, what all the different things are that might cause them to make a decision not to come to work.
Yeah.
We don't understand it. And so anyway, yes. So the idea of building a collaboration of employers to solve for a problem, like stabilizing your workforce so they can stay at work, is not something I haven't done before. I realize this is not an easy task. And I think what I'm really asking is for organizational leaders to contemplate the idea of, what if I do invest in people and they do leave for something better, and being okay with that.
Yeah.
I've also said, based on some of the demographics, and I mentioned this in the book, is that I think education might be the next benefit. Like I think that the demographics are such that for most positions, people are going to be able to show up and say, what education benefits do you have for me? Not even like what's the next career step for me, but how much are you willing to invest in my ongoing education? Mm-hmm. And if you don't have a benefit around education, I think they'll be able to make a choice to go work somewhere else. And I think it's really going to be more damaging for small to mid-market companies who might not be able to pay the same salary and benefits package as the larger scaled organizations. It's going to be harder and harder for us to get key talent. Like I think of somebody that runs my quality team, and I have one of them. I don't have 5 of them, so it's a super key position for me, right? So attracting good people into that position will get harder and harder for me. Mm-hmm. And if the gentleman that's in that position now is working on ongoing education, and there may be a time that he's ready and able to go to the next thing. But if we work together, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to just get the 2 weeks notice, but there will be a conversation, and then he'll help us find his replacement, which creates a lot less turbulence for our organization.
Yeah, a lot less turbulence and a lot less cost overall.
Right.
I love what you're saying, and there's so many gems to talk about at various points. Yeah. The one thing that sticks out is when you said about the learning and development and education being the next benefit. And, it's some people are like, oh, is someone going to pay for my MBA? Is this company going to do that? And that's great, but small to mid-market companies may not be able to afford that. But what they can do is help that person learn, grow, and develop internally. And it might be some external courses, but it might be it's more, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm seeing it as more of a mindset shift in leadership to say, hey, we're investing in our people, right, knowing that they may leave and go somewhere else. But if we don't do that, it's a much bigger drag on the business because they're not learning and growing.
Right. I totally 100% agree. And it's interesting you bring up the MBA because I've had this conversation internally, and I've paid for a number of people that got their MBAs and went on to other jobs. And the whole time they were working on their MBAs, they did a great job for us. And every step of that learning that they went through, they got better at what they were doing for us. And then they also helped us find their replacements. And yes, that stuff is expensive. But I'll tell you what, 2 weeks notice, trying to fill a key position or a key role, and then getting the wrong person in that role and having to reset again in 6 months, that's costly.
Absolutely.
I'll guarantee you that's an MBA right there.
Yeah. Oh, the stats on the cost of hiring new employees is astronomical. And the higher in the organization they go, it's anywhere from, right, I think it's 0.5 to 1.5% of annual salary. The higher it goes. And that could be even more depending on if it's a specialized role.
Well, and that's true. I mean, again, one of my frustrations with the whole Source book and trying to get those conversations off the ground was we really focused on the cost of turnover. And that's how we measured the return on investment that we asked employers to make. And for my organization today, for somebody who's hired in an entry-level position for the first, that first 90 days, if we have a turnover event in the first 90 days, it's a cost of $8,000. And we've run those numbers, and we know that's accurate, but there's a lot of online calculators and all the rest of it. But employers run those numbers, and they're so high, nobody believes them. They're so used to doing business the way that they've done it that they can't fathom that they would have allowed that much waste to occur in their system and not caught it.
Yeah.
But it happens over and over again. And we actually proved it out by setting very specific goals to decrease the 90-day turnover, because we know that past 90 days, people stay quite a bit longer with us. And so we saw a correlation to a reduction in defects in the plant, a reduction in safety issues, a reduction in absenteeism. So all of those sorts of things, a reduction of the problems that HR had to handle, so the HR team could work on again, more developmental sorts of activities as opposed to remedial types of activities. All of those things add, again, resilience and capacity to your organization, right?
Yeah.
So,
and I get this feeling and vibe from you that you care a lot about the people in your organization, which a lot of leaders do. But you started because you started in this business when you were basically 12, yeah, a kid, and you started on the front lines. We won't go into the child labor laws or anything like that, but family company, right?
I don't think my dad cared.
But you started and you worked alongside frontline workers for so long. So you have this different perspective than I'd say a lot of executive leaders have.
I would say that's probably true. It's probably less true in smaller to mid-market companies where they've been, first generation or, started by the entrepreneur or maybe second generation. Certainly when you get to more scaled corporations, I would say that's true. I had a coach who told me, because I test extreme introvert, that I needed to get some public speaking experience. And he told me it didn't count until I got paid for it. So I developed some material around what happened in our family business, and it's actually amazing that I didn't bankrupt the business. My dad did a horrible job of estate planning. We won't go into that now. But what I found out is I went out and did get paid for doing these presentations on family business and generational transition, was that family business is I ran into story after story after story where people would come up and say things like, my uncle is your dad. My grandmother is still coming into work every day and she doesn't let anybody do anything unless it's her way. And, it was incredible to me how common the story is across the country in small and mid-market businesses. So anyway, I don't know how we jumped off there. So
again, all topics are good topics. It's really about how are we. And one of the reasons I started this podcast is around the well-being side, and I gave you a bit of background on my history of working with elite athletes, and then on the performance side, and then when I got into personal training, all my clients were corporate executives and stressed out and burnt out, and realizing that work was the primary cause of a lot of their health and psychological challenges.
Right.
And so looking at how do we change work to make it a healthier environment where people can thrive and do their best work and actually want to show up and bring their best to it. And from what we're talking about here is how do you get to know your people and create the environment where they can do their best work and be okay for them to move on. And that's a very different leadership mindset. Right.
Well, you know what? It is interesting because I think that you sort of get into, and if it's your senior executive who's drives hard and it's about the numbers and it's about the growth and you find the stories that the family falls apart. They are stressed out, bad health metrics at early ages. But man, they're making a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's some of the opportunity we have. I mean, we know the statistics around people's health, community health, and one of the things I say is employers are great. We're great at blaming all the externalities for all of our employee problems. It's bad government policy. It's a bad education system. People are lazy. Nobody has a work ethic anymore. But we never look in the mirror and say, so what? People are people, man. They want some purpose. What if we invest in our people and we say, what would you like to work for?
Yeah.
And let's build less of a rules-based organization. And you've got an idea of how to do this differently. Well, let's hear it. Let's do a small test and see if it's better, right? How do we instill this very human desire for purpose and for learning? And how do we bring curiosity about change and development to even the frontline positions and frontline people? We can do that. That is within the reach of us as business leaders. But it does take, like you said, a mindset shift. And I think from scarcity to abundance is a good way to think about that. My daughter read a book. Her high school calculus teacher had them read a book. I wish I had it at my fingertips, like The Abundance Mindset or something mindset. But it was brilliant. It was exactly what we're talking about. It's like, you've got to change. And I don't think I really, truly don't think it's a lot of degrees. We're not asking people to shift 180 degrees. I think it's more like, did you ever play the game Trouble?
No.
Okay, it's an old, I'm dating myself now. But it was a game where it had a dice embedded under a dome, and you push down a string.
Yeah. I remember that one. Yeah, Trouble. Yeah.
You pop the dice up. But I think it's just a little bit of an inflection. That once you see this as a different way of running your business and in the investing in your people, I don't think you can unsee it. And once you try it and you see that it works, I don't think you go back.
I agree. Yeah, leaders that make that shift, and as an executive coach, I work with lots of leaders all the time, and when that light bulb goes off and you see the realization that dawn on them that they're in control, and as you said, hold up the mirror, they're like, oh, because a lot of times they come in, they're bitching about this and this so-and-so here, and all these problems are happening, and a question like, so what's your role in that?
Right.
And they've never thought of it before. They're so external focused that when you can turn that internally for a minute to say, okay, well, yeah, I can't control everything, but what can I control?
Right. Well, and I think that, the other thing that I'm learning is, as most people would describe a type A CEO, that, I like to convince people by arm twisting, and I need to do a better job of bringing them into the solution. Like, hey, have you ever applied your problem solving skills to this? We've done it this way for so long and it hasn't worked. So let's sit down and think of a different approach. And I think once you start doing that and you think well, let's invest in people and let's let that learning and that development bring more ideas into our organization, and let's see how that impacts how do we interact with our customers? How do we solve problems in shipping? How do we solve problems on our plant floor? How do we develop our messaging from a marketing standpoint? All of those things get richer. You get more depth. You get more options. Believe me, if we had not had as resilient a workforce as we had when COVID hit, I'd have lost my business. I mean, when things get tough, you want a resilient workforce that's helping you problem solve. You don't want to do that all by yourself.
Absolutely. And that's where I think the small to mid-market businesses have such an advantage over the large enterprise organizations, because they have that ability to be nimble. When the senior leadership that has that mindset shift, it shows up a lot quicker in the changed behavior in the organization.
Right.
As you said, when you have that there, when a challenge does come up, everyone's engaged and more likely to rally around finding the solution.
Yeah, and I think we probably all have, personal examples somewhere in our past of somebody who, somewhere we were struggling with something. I have a great story about a math teacher. I was not a great math student, and he took sort of a special interest and I worked harder for him and got better grades in math than I ever got in my life because he actually sort of stepped aside and helped me figure out how to learn my math than any other teacher ever had done. And I all of a sudden was like, I had this huge desire to work hard for him, even though the math was still tough. He didn't make the math easier. He just invested some time in, teaching me how to use the tools, right?
Which made you want to work harder and do what was necessary to learn the hard math.
Yeah, and it was more about because I wanted to show him my appreciation through, working on this stuff and really trying to get it because he was investing in me, as opposed to all of a sudden I fell in love with math, because I'm not going to tell you I fell in love with math. My daughter, on the other hand, she loves math. So I don't know where that came from, but she didn't get it from me.
If we look at the bigger picture, like zoom back out, and from a opportunity standpoint, what do you see as the biggest opportunity leaders and businesses have these days?
Yeah. So, Tim, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and, there's all these social problems in our country, the dead end jobs, poverty statistics, depending on what part of the country you live in, 40% of the population lives in poverty defined by Alice or whatever the definition is. And, I think we feel pretty powerless. Our government doesn't seem to solve it. All the nonprofits don't seem to solve it. They all have services that help people, and that's great. But the statistics come out every year and they just don't get any better. And this is I may not win any friends with this next statement, but I think that employers are a bit of the problem. Like, we're sort of a roadblock. And there's a couple reasons for that. I think, first of all, in like a lot of the policy development and all of the solutions that are out there in the world and how to solve these things, we've never been asked to be at the table as part of the solution. People always show up and they ask us for money, or they want us to, hire some of the people that they've trained, or, be the beneficiaries of their programs. But they've never actually shown up and helped and asked us to be at the design table to solve some of those problems. And, I think the other piece of that is then we've never seen that we have much power in solving those. So we act a little bit like a victim in that talent system, which is why we blame everybody else for, quote unquote, underperforming talent. And I think that if we decide to take some responsibility for those things that like the externalities of not being educated properly, well, let's just own that. Let's get the education done. Again, I go back to the premise that we are educators. Like, we know how to teach people things. We do it all the time. We can contract it out. We don't have to build all the training documents ourselves. There's great community colleges around this country. There's great tech schools. There's all kinds of educational resources that we can partner with to bring all that stuff into our organizations. And believe me, when you reach out to the educational institutions and ask for help, especially now as they're seeing students leave, they'll be more than happy to partner with you on some sort of training, development, education tracks for people. So we're not without resources, and we're not without the skill set to problem solve for them. And I think at the same time, we need to put ourselves at the table in some of our community settings and say, let's get together with a couple of our business partners in our network and let's go talk to some of these nonprofits and let's redesign some of these solutions in our communities. And we're doing a lot of that in West Michigan right now. And I've seen more activity and desire to collectively and collaboratively fix some of these things. But there's a lot of business leaders that are part of the drivers. They're at the table to help solve these problems. And I think that's the right way to do it because we have the one thing that nobody else in the economy has, and that's jobs. And I mean, there's lots of organizations that employ people, and I'm including all of them. If you're an employer, you have you have talent working for you. I think when I say enterprise, people are thinking that I'm not talking about school systems or healthcare systems or even government systems that employ people. I mean, we all have some responsibility. I just think that privately held businesses tend to be a little bit more nimble and tend to be able to act more quickly than some of the other, larger, more embedded institutions.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, there are lots of great examples of businesses, especially in smaller communities, doing great things for the community. How do you see it taking the next step? Like you said, being at the table, what does that look like in the end? What if that next step is taken beyond just the standard community outreach?
Yeah. So again, I've done a lot of work with community resources over the years, and I think if, without getting into like all the details, if I could like describe a future state, it would be, let's just make it simple. It's a network of 5 companies that share open positions, but they also share that like what it takes to get each position filled, like what the skill sets are required, what the education pieces are for each of those jobs. And it's sort of like an open system within and between those companies. And alongside of that is a set of education partner or a set of education partners that can help bring those resources to that network of companies. And I think in today's world, there's probably a technology platform that helps do that. I think it would be a great AI application. I'm actually talking to a company next week that I think's got an interesting platform. I think that being able to understand going from, say, my company to another's, how to map that skill set is far easier with today's technology platforms than it was doing it manually 10 years ago. And then I think, again, with all of the money that's been handed out over the years for job readiness and job development, I think having government as a partner, like let's invest in stuff that works. Like if we're able to demonstrate the ability to move people through, from one job to another and have every one of those steps be a better job that ultimately leads to somebody living a resilient life, not requiring any government subsidies, and ultimately getting to a thriving life, I think we could demonstrate a far more productive use of some of that government funding too. And I think we have to prove a little bit first, but I think if we could demonstrate some actual return and impact some of those statistics, and look, every other sector's tried it. I think it's our turn.
Yeah, well, I agree. It's our turn for sure. You've mentioned the education, training, development of people and helping them move through the company. Where does AI come into this? How do you see AI as a factor in this training and development?
I had the opportunity to attend a win-win workforce conference in Chicago, and I was really blown away by the AI applications that are already starting to operate in this space. I think that building a platform, and again, I'll just use the example of building a network of employers, but having sort of a common platform for skill development, education, being able to understand really the skill and education pieces that somebody needs to have a certain job. And look, you could easily incorporate some of the like non-skills or soft skills testing, like, predictive index or um, Chally or Myers-Briggs or whatever people are using to do some of those assessments. But you could add on certain sorts of assessments to all of that and put it all in a data set that AI could use to help people see what kinds of pathways. Like if I get this kind of training, here's the kind of jobs it opens up for me. If I get this kind of education, here's the kind of jobs. Do I want to go from the plant floor to a skilled trades? Do I want to go from the plant floor to finance? Do I want to go from the plant floor to tech? I think you could build a platform where that would sort of be an easy button and people could decide which education lanes they wanted to pursue. And again, I understand that there's cost and all the rest of it in there, but I think that AI could play a huge role in putting that stuff together and making it pretty easy to do.
With all the changes and this pervasive fear that I would say is across the market in terms of how AI is taking jobs.
Oh,
what do you see happening with particularly? Wow, what do you see happening with the workforce over the next, call it 5 years, which 5 years in AI terms is like millennia?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a very real question, and I think that people are. I think the fear is probably well founded. But again, I think that as business leaders, we have some responsibility to figure out how to help people get whatever that education and development is. Like, teach our people how to use the AI tools. Like, we know we're going to bring them on. It's going to require a different skill set. And again, if we don't take some responsibility, and I don't mean responsibility like necessarily just paying everybody, but I mean responsibility in designing that future state, using our problem solving skills, using our skills of looking out at trends, understanding how we're going to be engaging capital in the use of, acquiring AI platforms, using that knowledge to help design what sort of skills and education we need to get people so they can be resilient in that future economy. Because the reality is, Tim, if we don't do that, we're going to end up taking care of them somehow because the people aren't going away.
Yeah.
It's not like they just get deleted from our economy, right? So we're all going to be responsible one way or another. So we may as well own some of the responsibility in trying to get them ready to participate in that future economy.
I love it, and I agree completely. And I co-facilitated a session with a bunch of leaders, I guess a couple months ago, on future-ready leadership. And one of the biggest themes that came out of it was adaptability. So that's like the number one skill for humans, I guess you would say, in the next 5 to 10 years is how adaptable, how do you shift your mindset and your actions to be adaptable to learn and grow and be able to see trends, as you said, and make that shift rather than sticking your head in the sand or putting the blinders on and saying, things aren't changing, let's keep it the same. Because the ability to create that shift is critical.
Well, and I think, you sort of, just in that statement, and I love what you said, but I think it sort of goes back to creating that, Great Salt Lake environment or the Great Lakes environment, because if you're going to be adaptable, it means you have access to information. It means you've been given access to problem solving skills. And if you don't have that, you don't have the ability to be adaptable because you don't know what to adapt to or from. Right?
Yeah. Well, and another part is I guess, to be able to proactively adapt and not have to do it from panic or fear or desperation at the last minute when, the floor is falling out from under you. You got to grab the nearest thing and hold on. And it's this panic. That's where a lot of people are, is they don't change until the last minute.
Well, and it's interesting. And I think that there is some, they say that as human beings, we really don't like change very much. And I think that this is an old example in our company now, but we at one point put a highly automated piece of equipment in, and we actually displaced about 80 jobs. And, we knew it was coming. It was a 3-year build on the equipment. And so two things happened in that process. One, we had all of our work instructions in both English and Spanish. So we had never pushed people in our organization who were only Spanish speaking to learn English, which was great. It gave us access to a whole workforce of people in our community who didn't speak English. But what I did was I did not make them very resilient for their next job. And so in that time frame, we actually got those people through English as a second language classes, the people that we knew were going to be, pushed out of our organization. And then we also referred people out to the community. And we ended up placing, there were some people that went back to school. We ended up placing almost 90% of the people that were being downsized into other companies. But the other thing that happened is we knew the new line was going to need a different set of skills. So this goes back to your AI question. We were about 10 weeks away from turning this line on, and my COO is like, we're going to have to hire some machine operators to run this line. And I'm like, well, why are we going to have to do that? He said, because we don't have anybody that's trained. I'm like, well, you've had 3 years. Why aren't they trained? And he's like, well, you really want me to train the people we have to run this line? I'm like, yeah, I do. And he said, well, you're going to put your capital at risk if I do that. I said, well, I said, you're not hiring any new machine operators. So I think you better get busy and train some people. But, I do think that there's this, I don't know, this reason that we'll just always be able to go out to the market and get the talent we need. And I feel like we can own that responsibility. That's not difficult. With the technology changes, they're happening quickly, but they're not happening overnight in our individual organizations. We've got some visibility to when those things are going to be implemented. Let's take some responsibility and get our people ready for those changes and bring them along with us.
I love that philosophy. And I hazard a guess to say it's not the norm in most organizations.
Well, and then I would sort of come back and say, ergo, that's our miss. This is how we can have impact in our communities and on some of these statistics that we all read them. We all read the poverty and the undereducation and the lack of opportunity statistics. And we all live with these big pockets of jobs that we can't find anybody for. And again, we're sort of the problem solvers in the economy. That's how we get paid. So why don't we apply some of those skills to these problems?
Exactly. Yeah, that's what entrepreneurs do, is solve problems and create value.
Right. And I think here we're talking about human capital value, right?
Yeah. So many more things we could talk about. If we had to put a bow on it and wrap this up, if you're talking to leaders out there that are listening to this episode, what are some tangible, simple steps they can take right away to start moving the needle on their team and their impact?
Well, I don't think I'd be an entrepreneur if I didn't say go to theretentiontrap.com and buy my book.
Absolutely.
But I really think, I think that my next phase of life is to inspire leaders to think differently about our relationship to the talent inside our organizations. And if you want a tangible thing, it would be have some conversations with some people a few levels below. If you're a senior leader, a few levels below, and try to dig into what are the aspirations of those individuals, and actually listen to what they tell you. And then think about how you might be able to help them move toward what they aspire to in their careers or their lives as an employer. And think about what that would mean for your business and for your culture.
I think it would make a huge impact. And again, mindset shift, stepping outside of the day-to-day to do something different and to take the ego off and put it on the table and just go sit and listen. It's not something that's done as often as it should be. I think we'd work in very different environments if that did happen on a more regular basis.
That's what I'm hoping for.
Perfect. Well, I'm on your side. I'm ready to be on this journey with you. So thank you so much.
Well, you let me talk to your audience, so you've proven it. So thank you very much. I appreciate my time with you today, Tim.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. And so where can people get the Retention Trap and find out more about you and your organization? So
the retentiontrap.com will get you to my website. The book is officially launches June 3rd. The book can be pre-ordered before that. And those links are all on that website.
Wonderful.
Well,
thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to connecting again soon.
I would love that. Thank you very much.
That wraps up another episode of the Working Well podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, which guests or topics would you like to see featured on the show? Message me through LinkedIn or on the contact page of timborys.com with your ideas. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tim Borys with Fresh Wellness Group, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.